This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And so I want to give a special thank you to Stephanie Wheeler, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, and to Michael Horner, Mark Atkin, and Yekaterina Kosova, who all just made one-time contributions to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 427 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the animated movies The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, The Sword and the Stone, The Secret of NIMH, and Titan AE. And this will involve spoilers for all of those movies, so just be aware of that. And this is a follow-up to our panel on animated 80s fantasy movies back in episode 413, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 16th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's the former script supervisor for Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and is currently a staff writer at WWE's Friday Night SmackDown. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
The next up, we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 14th appearance on the show. He's the author of the novel King of Shards, and his short story The Last Novelist, or A Dead Lizard in the Yard, was nominated for the Nebula Award and was a finalist for the Eugene Foster Memorial Award. His new novel Queen of Static is available now on his Patreon page over at patreon.com/Matt Kressel. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be back.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, making his 13th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction. His nonfiction book Think Like Google is out now, and his short story All Our Donkeys Were in Vain appears in the new anthology The Best of Galaxy's Edge 2015 to 2017. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Great to be back.
Okay, so as I mentioned in the intro there, this is a follow-up to episode 413. And it was very clear in that episode that people really wanted to talk about the Hobbit cartoon and the Secret of NIMH cartoon. So I figured we could come back and talk about those. And to round it out, we're also going to talk about some other related cartoons to those too. So in terms of the Secret of NIMH, we're going to talk about Don Bluth, who sort of split off from Disney and started up his own studio. So we'll be talking about The Sword and the Stone, which was an early movie that he worked on as an assistant animator at Disney, and also Titan AE, which was the last film that he did. But before that, I just want to start off with all these Tolkien cartoons. So let's start off with Andrea. So Andrea, this Hobbit cartoon came out in 1977, same year as Star Wars, same year I was born. So why should people in 2020 care about this Hobbit cartoon from 1977?
I don't know that they should care. They should certainly be interested in it and want to see it. I'm not quite sure what you mean by care. It's beautiful animation. That's certainly something to really want to see it for. I mean, personally for me, but it was very meaningful for me in watching it. I don't know that I've seen it since it aired. But I remembered it word for word. I was singing the songs along with it. I was reciting the dialogue. I think that probably has to do with the fact that I went out and got the Hobbit album, and I used to play it constantly. So yeah, it was genuinely just talking along with the movie. I knew all the dialogue, the inflections even. So it was really a trip back to my childhood with that. But for somebody who didn't experience it that way, I think it's just a beautiful piece of animation. It's got some actually good music in it, and it's actually quite a good interpretation of The Hobbit. Certainly better than the Peter Jackson 5 hour snore fest that
well,
was.
No, it's way more than 5 hours because three movies and they're each like almost 3 hours long, I think.
Oh, so. God. Okay, so like 25 hours then. Yeah.
But I guess we'll probably get to that. But so you thought this held up watching it as an adult?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, I don't know if that means, see, I can't really tell you if it held up as a piece of animation or as a movie, or as actually it was a TV show, or if it's just because it hit me in the spot where it was so meaningful to me. This is what led me to The Hobbit and what led me eventually to Lord of the Rings. So it was personally meaningful to me. So that was why watching it was an experience. I don't know what that's going to mean to anybody else.
No, that's interesting though. I didn't realize that this is how you discovered Tolkien. And for people who might not have heard you before, Tolkien is one of your favorite authors that you reread every year or multiple times a year or something growing up.
No, Lord of the Rings was the book that made me want to be a writer. And I can tell you exactly the moment. I was 12 years old. I was in my parents' bedroom. I was reading, what's the first one?
Fellowship of the Ring.
Fellowship. So I'm reading Fellowship. It was the Escape from Moria scene, and I was just entranced. And I got to the end of the chapter and came out of it. It was like coming out of a dream, and I was sweating and I was panting like I was running with them. And I said to myself, literally said in my head, I was like, I want to be able to do that. And that's how I decided to be a writer. Yeah.
That's super cool. And so how about Matt? You told us a little bit in an earlier episode about your history with this Hobbit cartoon, but refresh our memory. What is your history with this Hobbit?
What did I say? Maybe I incriminated myself.
You told some story about your throwing a temper tantrum because your dad wouldn't buy you the record or something.
Yeah. So I'm sure I saw this. I believe I saw it on TV when I was really young, so young that I didn't have very clear memories of it, and I was in Washington D.C. with my parents, and we went to some gift shop, which I think was also a bookshop. I don't remember too well, but they had like the Hobbit. It was basically like the sing-along book with like a picture book, like an abbreviated story.
Yep.
And I freaked out. I wanted that so bad. And my father's like, "No, you have to read the actual book. You can't. You can't. It's abbreviated. You can't." And he just was very adamant about like, no, that's not where you should start reading it. You should start reading it, in literature. I'm like, I don't remember how old I was. I was pretty young, and I flipped out. I think he eventually like relented. I was, I could be pretty persistent if I want something, and I did listen to it like a lot, and like it was kind of tear jerking rewatching this because I think maybe 20 years ago I rewatched this, like just for nostalgia, but just watching it again now and the songs just kind of brought me back to my childhood. It was wonderful.
Yep.
And so then how about Tom? What's your history with this cartoon?
Yeah, just like Andrea and Matt, I was introduced to it through the book. The book had these great animation panels taken right out of the movie, and my mom, who was pretty staunchly conservative in many ways, kind of older generation, almost World War II generation, just barely missed being in World War II. She wound up being in the Air Force during the Korean War, but she brought home this Hobbit book, and she, like, as far as as much as she was that kind of character that I just described, she also would just like bring home these great books out of the blue and be like, here. And she wouldn't let us have TV in the summer, so she gave me that book in the summer one time, and I was just like, what is this thing? It had these great animated, animation frames to kind of pull me into the story. And I was very young. I think I was 4th or 5th grade. And I read that book until not just the covers fell off, but until all the pages fell out one by one, because it was literally like the binding was just, the threads were just coming out of the binding.
Yeah.
And
the cover fell off of mine, just FYI.
I guess that happened with it. It was such a big book, but I never watched it. Again, that pulled me into Tolkien, and then a friend of mine later was like, "Oh yeah, if you like that book, you've got to read the Lord of the Rings." And I think I was in sixth or seventh grade by that point. But yeah, absolutely fell in love with it. Didn't see the cartoon until I was I was like 13 or something. And then saw it and was like, oh, that's where the illustrations, I always wondered where those illustrations, I knew it was from some TV show or some movie, but I never knew what it came from. And then watched that and absolutely loved the movie. I thought, the characterizations I thought were really good. I loved the art. I loved Gollum. That Gollum voice to me, to this day, remains like what I think of whenever I read, again, without watching Peter Jackson. Why did he decide it had to be 3 movies 9 hours long? It's such a great, it's like, oh, this is such a great story. They pack so much into such a short time. And he's like, no. The mistake with this book is that it's way too short and has too much action. So that's how that movie was for me. A lot of the characterizations in there, Gandalf, I still kind of harken back to that whenever, how you get like brain sludge in your head, you get like a quote in your head and it just pops up in your mind at whatever time. I still hear Gandalf's voice that way when I think those great quotes like, I can't think of one off the top of my head. I was going to say
unforgettable quotes.
Well, no, I was going to say the one. No, it is from him. I was going to say the one where he's like, well, so do all who, in such dark times, wish that this didn't happen to him. And I was thinking for a minute that was from the. No, it was. I'm sorry. It was from the different voice. But anyway, I'll stop babbling now.
Yeah, let me stop you there. So, I watched this a bunch of times growing up, and I was a huge fan of The Hobbit. I mean, I've read The Hobbit, I believe 20 or 25 times. And if you listen to our last one I was talking about how I had to force myself to read Lord of the Rings. So I mean I like The Hobbit way more than the Lord of the Rings. But so I can remember this cartoon actually being pretty scary. Like I think I had nightmares about the part where where they're camped in the cave outside the goblin halls and the cave wall opens and their ponies get like pulled into the darkness. Like stuff like that was really scary. And I really love this movie. I love the character designs. I love the songs. I love the dragon. I love pretty much everything about it. Going back and watching it now, there are definitely some issues I had with it, but overall, I think it's terrific. And I think as Tom is sort of saying, I think the best thing about it is that it's, 90 minutes or something. You get the story of the Hobbit, and it's not boring. You get the whole thing. And it's just fun. It holds your attention. You don't get bored. Yeah, if you, I think it's a very terrific adaptation of The Hobbit.
Yep.
But so this doesn't just become a total love fest. I will get into some of my criticisms. And these are things I don't think I noticed even so much watching it as a kid. But watching it now, there are parts that they clearly cut stuff out that kind of needed to be in there for it to make sense. And so the first thing that jumped out at me like that is the part where the dwarves have all been captured by the 3 trolls. And what happens in the book is that Gandalf keeps the trolls squabbling all night about how they're going to cook the dwarves, and they don't realize the sun is coming up. And I feel like something just got cut out. Like they had, I feel like they had animated it and everything, and then just for time, something got cut out because it just jumps to them getting turned to stone without any of that stuff happening. It just seems super weird to me.
Well, Gandalf basically in this one, he just comes in and makes the sun rise early.
Yeah.
Is that what was meant to have happened?
Yeah, he's like, oh, wait, how did the sun? It's my understanding that he just made the sun rise early in this version.
Yeah, that's what it
that's
seemed like. I don't know if it
wizard.
Yeah, but well.
Yeah, that was a big. I had a lot of problems with it watching it as an adult that I didn't expect because I loved it so much when I was younger, and when I saw it now, I was just like, oh, I think my brain like made that better than it was. Like a lot of these things that you've made us watch.
Forced at gunpoint?
Dave is just systematically destroying my childhood. But no, that part in particular really bothered me because it was like the opposite of where, like, say what you want about Peter Jackson, when he did the original Lord of the Rings movies, he he did a really great job of taking things that didn't have strong story or character ties and made them more, like when Merry and Pippin just kind of are like hanging out and along for the ride, and then Treebeard's like, you know what, I'm gonna go to war. But in the movie, in the book, that's how it happens. In the movie, he's like, no, we're gonna make them, like, convince him to go to war, and make them much more an integral part of the story. And whereas this, it was like they did it the opposite way. Like there was a great story of Bilbo having to exert some kind of effort and be like, I'm gonna talk to I think in the book, doesn't he notice like what Gandalf is doing and help keep the argument going, or am I just making that up?
I think you're just making that up.
All right, I'll stop babbling.
But yeah, so I guess it's going to be hard to talk about this without talking about Peter Jackson, so we might as well get into it. I mean, the thing that, and I had been so aghast at the first Hobbit movie, I hadn't watched the other two, but I just watched them in the last 24 hours just so I could talk about them on this panel.
Oh, I'm surprised you're still like. I'm surprised you're not in a coma.
I'm pretty close, but but I thought the one thing that there were a couple of things about it I liked, but I thought the one thing I thought that the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies did really well is they made the story make more sense. In the book, the dwarves are basically like, we're going to go kill this dragon, and it makes no sense. Like, how are they planning to do that? They have no plan at all. And so he made it so that in the Peter Jackson version, he made it so that the plan is basically to like sneak in, have Bilbo steal the Arkenstone of Thrain, and then they're going to use that to unite all the dwarves. So that actually makes a lot more sense. So I thought that was a pretty good change. And the thing that bothered me most about the cartoon rewatching it was that they got rid of the Arkenstone of Thrain altogether, which I think is actually the most important part of the story, because that's where Bilbo, he gives the Arkenstone to the men of Lake Town. And it's this great sort of active character moment where there's conflict and he's like turned against the dwarves and everything's all like morally ambiguous and and I've always liked that. That's always been my favorite moment in the story. And so for them to have gotten rid of that and it turns into this like really kind of weird, like hippie, like anti-war message, which seems kind of out of place to me. So I don't know. Well,
just to talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Tolkien, that was in the story because Tolkien was a World War I veteran, suffered great PTSD is what we call it now, but it was like shell shock, and was, I think, probably came back and was very anti-war. So probably that's where that comes from.
No, there's no question. Well, yeah, so he was at the Battle of the Somme, and all of his friends, they had all agreed that they were all going to be famous writers, and they all died because they were all from the same town. So no, there's no question that he was against, senseless war and stuff. I don't remember in The Hobbit, like just in the movie, and I haven't read it in a long time, but in the movie, it seems like Bilbo's just like, oh, war is silly. I'm just going to like chill out while everybody else fights. And I don't remember that from the book. I mean, I remember it more like sometimes, like you have to fight. Like, war is never a good thing, but there's such a thing as a just war or a necessary war. And the thing that the message that came across to me in the cartoon was just like, oh, wars are so silly. Why would anyone ever bother with any of this silly stuff? And it didn't seem the way I remember the story anyway. But I don't know, Matt, do you have any perspective on this?
I definitely didn't come out of this with an anti-war message. I mean, it was, it could just be that they thought perhaps that it wouldn't go over so well with the parents accompanying the children to this. Yeah. And it's like, well, let's just throw in the anti-war message so we don't get accused of being, pro-violence or something. I don't know. I didn't come out of it with any particular pro or against war.
Was this 1978? This movie
I have 77.
77.
77, because I was thinking maybe they just had it in there because the people who made the movie were coming out of the 60s, but it's pretty far removed from the 60s, so maybe not.
No, I don't know. No, I think that's exactly why it's in there with the whole post-Vietnam anti-war kind of.
Yeah.
And the score, the music is that kind of, I can't think of his name, but it's kind of that folksy kind of folk music.
Yeah, it's like Glenn Yarborough. Is that the name?
Yeah, Glenn Yarborough.
And he has the kind of tremolo voice, like he's in one of those spinning cabinet speakers or something.
It is kind of super duper hippie.
Yeah, the music is super 70s.
Yeah.
Super.
But the Hobbit, the whole like Lord of the Rings was like, it was like a rallying cry for that whole movement. Like Frodo Lives was written everywhere.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, you would see Frodo Lives written on walls, and I was like, what does that mean?
Well, Led Zeppelin's Misty Mountain Hop. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. There's direct quotes in there. Yeah. There's a Gollum at the evil wall, crept up and slipped away. He's like, in the darkest depths of Mordor, I met a girl so fair. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. So leaving the anti-war stuff aside, what do you people think about my Arkenstone of Thrain thing? Did that strike anyone else?
Well, I didn't remember it from the book. It's been quite a while since I read the book.
Okay.
You know, and it's funny, you're looking at it with a critical eye, even though you loved it as a kid. I'm incapable of looking at it with a critical eye. It was just a trip back to my childhood for me. So there's stuff, I mean, there were a couple of things, I made some notes about things that were like, wow, the dwarves are, the goofy elf song was ridiculous. But other than that, it was, like I said, revisiting my childhood. And it's hard to be critical when you're doing that, you know? Right.
Well, why don't we bring in the Lord of the Rings cartoon here too? Okay. So, because is that something from your childhood? Lord of the Rings cartoon?
I know I saw it, and I also have that record, and it's a pressed record with cells from the animation pressed into the record. It's 2 records. I also had the poster, the big poster. I had that framed in my room.
Gandalf and the sword and stuff.
Yes, exactly. Now.
So, are you incapable of being critical of the Lord of the Rings?
Oh, hell no. It was torturous watching it. It was absolutely torturous. It was terrible, like super bad. I don't remember watching it in the theater. I must have seen it. But it was, oh, good Lord. I wanted it to end.
Yeah, well, I had never seen it because I was such a big fan of the Hobbit cartoon, and I can remember being down at Choice Video, the video rental store in Katona, and seeing that there was a Lord of the Rings cartoon, and being really excited and taking it to my parents and being like, oh, I got to watch this, and they're like, no, don't watch it, it's terrible. And I was like, why? Like, I couldn't even imagine, like, how could it not be great? And my dad's just like, oh, it's like the animation's weird, it's like rotoscoped, it's not good. Yep. And so all these years, I never saw it. And I always imagined it was like Fire and Ice that we watched, which I don't love that style of animation.
Nope.
But then watching this, I was like, holy shit, like this makes Fire and Ice look like, Botticelli or something.
Yeah,
like,
sure does.
Like something went seriously wrong with this movie, just on a basic production level.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to get Matt in here. So Matt, what are your sort of initial thoughts on Lord of the Rings?
I'm going to be the contrarian. I had fun with this.
Okay.
Wow.
The animation style was completely rotoscoped, and it was like one scene it's totally animated, and the next scene it's basically just black and white film that's been painted over, But there was something, I think it might just be my love of the Lord of the Rings story itself that was carrying me through, like just the slow buildup of tension that just keeps getting larger and larger, and the stakes keep going up and up and up. That I actually, like, when it ended, I was like, oh, I want to watch the end of this. But as we know, that The Return of the King is not quite a sequel to this, right?
No.
So let's just explain in case anyone hasn't seen this. So this covers basically up through the Battle of Helm's Deep. So more or less, up through the Two Towers movie, right, the Peter Jackson. And then Ralph Bakshi, the director, wanted to release it as Lord of the Rings Part 1. And the studio was like, no, people won't go see it. So they just released it as The Lord of the Rings. So people had no idea. They just go to see it expecting it's going to be the whole story. And it just ends, basically halfway through the story.
Yeah, I have the very vivid memory of going, what the fuck? Probably not what the fuck, but what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
I think I was probably young, but yeah.
I mean, it was super violent, right? So
Yes,
I was like,
it
as
is.
I'm watching this, I'm like, they're showing like people's guts spilling out.
Yeah.
I mean, the blood is like slightly
Yeah.
not red, so it looks a little fake, but it's like, this is pretty violent for kids. And I was also kind of struck by some of the scenes. I mean, it could just be that I'm conflating them in my memory, but I feel almost like Peter Jackson like stole a lot of shit from this. Like there were scenes, you know, with the Battle of Helm's Deep, and like even just the scene where you know, at the beginning when Bilbo is like, it's his 111th birthday and he's going away, like that, like, and all the hobbits are hanging out. I'm like, that looks really, really similar to, like, there's a point during the Battle of Helm's Deep, in fact, that I just thought it was like shot for shot looked like it was from the Peter Jackson movie, like with the ladders coming up to the wall and then they getting pushed back, and I was like, that actually, yeah, I wonder if, you know, Peter was looking at that, watched it a few times, and, you know, maybe didn't steal necessarily, but borrowed.
Well, famously he saw this as a kid, and that's why, or like as a, I don't know, how teenager or something, and you know, that's what kind of made him interested in the first place in Lord of the Rings, and watching it, I don't think there's any question that his movie is sort of from this.
I actually did read someplace that he was very influenced by the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are even shots, I think, like when the guy says, what's the line? At the party when he says "burr foots" and the guy says "burr feet." You know, it's like the same exact shot basically, but in the two.
Yeah.
So how about Tom?
Proud feet.
Oh, sorry. proud. That's right. Yeah. So Tom, what did you think of Lord of the Rings?
Well, I was really glad that Matthew went first, because I was thinking, I'm going to have to do I be honest and say that I liked it, or do I hide it? Because not only do most of you guys hate it, but then I went through and read the comments on your Facebook page, Dave, and there were a lot of people in there like, oh, that should just be buried in a deep hole. It is like it is definitely, not even possibly, it's definitely the worst movie ever made. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to like change my opinion or something, because I didn't like it when I was a kid, but when I got, like, I didn't see it until I was 14. I saw it at one of my birthday parties with a couple of friends of mine. My birthday, my precious. But I saw it there, and I remember same experience. I was like, this is kind of okay. The art's kind of weird. I didn't know what rotoscoping was, but I was like, that is kind of a bizarre way to have things look. And then the story just seemed kind of ponderous, and I was kind of like just talking to my friends, and we weren't really paying attention. And then it just ended, and we all looked at each other and were like, what just happened? Is it over? Like, what does he mean? Like, he saved all of Middle Earth? They didn't show that. But then when I watched it again, older, you know, I think the same thing. The distance made the heart grow less fond with The Hobbit, but more fond with this, because I was going into it remembering, like, this is a piece of garbage. And then when I saw it, I was like, you know, there's a lot about it, like the rotoscoping, where they're just like, okay, we don't have enough money to really do this scene up well. We'll just kind of put like a filter on it and make it look kind of like a black and white or whatever, and make it look grainy or whatever. And then you can tell it's just like the orcs are just like people with like weird, not quite masks on. But the part that I liked, there was a lot of story that I liked. I really liked the characterizations. I really liked the art, which I didn't, you know, it's totally different from The Hobbit, and it's totally different from Return of the King, which are similar to each other. But the art in this I really liked. I thought, like, I really liked how, like, every character, when you looked at them, they weren't just doing, like, facial expressions. They were, like, doing a lot of hand gestures, and their facial expressions, like, I couldn't stop looking at them. I was like, the Hobbits, you know, Frodo or Merry and Pippin, like, did the way they were smiling or something, or the way, like, not just that they were smiling, but kind of the way they were smiling, I was like, that's really different. It just looks really intriguing to me.
It didn't seem weird. Like, the characters, like, just the way they looked and their facial expressions didn't seem, like, super weird to you?
Yeah, it seemed weird, but it's a completely made-up reality. It's like, so, to me, yeah, it was off, or it was weird, but it was weird in a good way to me, that where I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I like the look on his face right there, kind of says something more about what's going on than what we see in the words. And, I don't know, I just liked it. I liked how Gandalf's hands were always moving, like he was Even when he was walking, his hands were just like flying all over the place, and I was like, I don't know, it must have been the actor who did that, the real live actor who did that, and then they rotoscoped over it. But it was neat to me. I found a lot to like about it. And, that's just, and like I said, I feel bad but I was so glad that Matthew, that you were like, no, I'm going to have to be the lone dissenter. I was like, okay, good. That seal is broken.
Let me just draw attention to, so, apparently there's a part, I'm not sure what it is, but apparently, Ralph Bakshi was having like labor disputes with the extras and stuff, and they were refusing to work, and so but they were all in their like orc costumes, so he just filmed them like eating at the craft services table and then used that in the film. And there's a part where Aragorn trips and falls on the ground, and it's not part of the story. The actor obviously just tripped, and whoever was animating it just animated that. So yeah. I don't know. It's weird. Actually, well, why don't we explain too about this, since you mentioned it, this Return of the King cartoon. So,
can I just point out a couple of things? Sorry, about Lord of the Rings that when I looked into it.
Yeah. Sure.
First of all, Anthony Daniels is Legolas.
Yeah.
And Peter S. Beagle wrote the screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one last thing. Unfortunately for Glorfindel, he was erased from this version as well. So shout out to poor Glorfindel. You deserve better. # you deserve better.
Yeah, and actually that was maybe the only part of this that I liked. That I'm trying to think if there was anything else, but the part where Frodo says, "You shall have neither the ring nor me."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is kind of rousing, but it comes after that weird like psychedelic. There's like 10 minutes of like him riding a horse through like some like LSD wasteland for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me explain quickly. We can come back to Lord of the Rings, but just explain quickly. So the Lord of the Rings ends basically with the Battle of Helm's Deep, and then Rankin Bass, who did the Hobbit cartoon, they came in with this cartoon that called The Return of the King, which basically covers that book, and it sort of has, it sort of catches you up on the story a little bit from the Hobbit and everything. I thought it was not anywhere near as good as The Hobbit, but it's all the same character designs and everything.
Yeah, and the same voice actors as well.
Yeah.
Well, there's Casey Kasem.
Oh God, yes. Casey Kasem is Mary. Oh
yeah.
God.
All I kept thinking of was like, is he going to just break into the top 40?
Yep, exactly.
America's top 40 pockets.
He was also, if anybody remembers, Battle of the Planets. He was also the voice of the leader. I can't remember his name. But his voice is so distinct that it's hard to like ever divorce him from that.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know why he was in it. It was so weird.
Yeah, but so Matt, what did you think of Return of the King?
Like I enjoyed the animation style of this. So that part was compelling, but I found like a lot of this just interminable. So it's like, especially when they break into song, I'm like, oh God, it's like I'm back in synagogue and they're just doing another 15-minute prayer. And I can't wait till this ends. Like they have to recite this like again. And I wanted to fast forward it, but I'm like, I'm going to be on a podcast, so I might as well.
Actually, though, someone on our Facebook page said that the "Where There's a Whip, There's a Way" song is one of his favorite songs from a movie.
Nice.
And
yes, that's my friend Chris. He's a good friend of mine.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, that song was okay, but I mean, mostly I don't know. I didn't find it as compelling as either of the previous two movies. Yeah. I mean, and like I feel like they turned some of like the orcs into like the orcs were kind of always buffoonish, even though they were evil, but like I feel like they almost made them like not scary in this. Like they're just like, we're stupid, you know. Like, they're almost like Muppets.
That they think that Frodo and Sam are orcs, even though they're like just wearing like a helmet and like they don't look anything. You know, they're not disguised well at all. I'll just say that I think the only thing in this that I like. Well, I guess in all these cartoons, I guess a lot of the dialogue is much closer to the books than the Peter Jackson versions.
Right.
And I think that generally I prefer the Peter Jackson, like, picking up the pace kind of thing. But
Yeah.
sometimes some of these are like, oh, I kind of like this. So the scene where Éowyn confronts the Witch King of Angmar,
Yeah.
this is the dialogue from this cartoon. She says, "Begone, foul Dwimmerlake, lord of Carrion, leave the dead in peace." And he says, "Come not between a Nazgul and his prey, or he will slay thee in turn." And she says, "Do what you will, I will hinder it if I may." And he says, "Hinder me, thou fool. Dost thou not know the prophecy? No living man may hinder me." And she says, "But no living man am I. You look upon a woman, Éowyn am I. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Be gone, for living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him." And I think that's pretty fucking cool. And so
that was a cool scene. That scene always gives me the chills.
And so in the Return of the King, that the Peter Jackson, that gets condensed down to, "I will kill you if you touch him," and then "I am no man."
Right.
And I think both versions are good, but I think that was one of the few parts of this where I was like, I'm glad that this interpretation exists, because it, is different from and adds something to the Peter Jackson version.
And isn't that the actual dialogue from the book? I remember Dwimmerlake, because I think I had to look it up.
I didn't check. I'm sure it's.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's either exactly the same or maybe cut down a little bit. I didn't go back and check, but. And
Theodore Bickel, who played Aragorn, he did the voice of Aragorn. He was a famous stage actor. He did Fiddler on the Roof. He was Tevye for a while, and he was like in a lot of theater and films, and I was just surprised that he was Aragorn.
Which movie are you talking about with that, though?
Return of the King?
You're talking about Return of the King? I thought that was John Hurt.
Wait a minute.
No.
Am I wrong about this? I thought Theodore Bickel
I'm probably wrong.
Hold on. I still have the page.
Yeah, Theodore Bickel was Aragorn in Return of the King.
Yeah.
Well, who did John Hurt play? Because he was in there, and I could have sworn that was his voice.
I think he was in the Lord of the Rings, not...
Was he in the Bakshi one?
Yeah, he was in the Bakshi one.
Okay,
I think he might have been Gollum.
No, because Gollum...
Yeah, John Hurt was Aragorn in...
in
Lord of the Rings, 1978, yeah.
Gollum was actually... I recognized the voice immediately. It was the same guy who played Rook in The Last Unicorn, Mommy Fortune, the witch's assistant who gets killed. And I don't remember the actor's name, but it's definitely... I don't have it, but it's definitely not John Hurt. It's somebody else.
Yeah, I can I just say real quick, I agree 100% about the music. With apologies to the people on your Facebook page who said it was awesome. I thought the story, it started out where it was just all this narration and music by the Mormon Tabernacle elves or whatever they were. It was really painful to listen to. And then, I did get a chuckle out of the "where there's a whip, there's a way." I was like, that's clever that they made that up and added it, and it really fits. It's kind of cool. But the rest of it was just like, okay, there's all this narration, and then you're like, okay, finally the narration is over, and then you're like, okay, now there's a big long song, and then there's more narration after that. So I was just like, just doesn't make any sense. And then the dialogue was so few and far between, it really bothered me. And I had never seen this one, by the way. Even as a kid, I never watched it. But then it was funny, like, as it went along, it was like the opposite of most movies that start out where they're putting a lot of effort in and then it just falls apart. This movie, like, started to come together near the end where like you said, that one scene with Éowyn, fighting the Ringwraith, the king of the Ringwraiths, was really cool. But there was a lot of stuff that it's like the narration, and there was more dialogue, and then the narration and the dialogue and the music just started to kind of fall into this cadence where they like worked with each other near like the second half or more of the movie. Where by the end I was like, wow, if I would have just stumbled across this on my own, I would have been like, all right, never mind, I'm going to stop this. But I was glad I watched to the end because it got better and better to me. It started out awful to me, and then toward the end it got like good. Like the way it all worked really worked out for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Any other thoughts? Just anyone have any other thoughts about any of these three cartoons?
I do. So Return of the King. I don't remember watching it, but I clearly must have, because the minute the guy started singing Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom, I was like, oh Oh my God, that's where that from. I have had this piece of music circling my brain for 40 years, clearly, because I didn't even know where it was from, but there it was. And I'm not joking. Every once in a while, probably usually when I'm watching one of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, that would come out. It's in my head. It's an earworm for 40 years. How do you carry an earworm for 40 years? But yeah, right. That was just like, oh my God. So I must have seen it. I don't remember seeing it. And I also remember the song about the whips. And I think the problem with this movie is the Hobbit movie is actually, they're telling you the story, and the only voiceovers you get is Gandalf at the beginning, and then the part where Bilbo is pretty much like writing the book. So you get that like as a journal. This is all voiceover, all backstory, and it doesn't work as a narrative, which is a real shame because it's a great story. It's so weird that I don't remember watching it, but clearly I did. And I also want to ask, why the hell does the Nazgul King have such a goofy voice? Did anybody else go like,
he
what?
Sounds like Skeletor.
Yes, really, yes. High pitched.
I didn't look him up, but that voice actor was definitely like a Hanna-Barbera staple. he would always like show up in everything, like in Scooby-Doo or whatever.
Like, yeah. He's got a contract. He has to be in everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I want to mention, contrast the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies since I spent 10 hours watching them yesterday.
Oh God.
Because I feel like this Hobbit is way closer to the right length, but still too short. I feel like maybe to do the Hobbit, you need like maybe 2 90-minute movies or something like that would be ideal. Because they had to cut out. They cut out the part where the dwarves like stumble off the trail looking for, pursuing the firelight to beg for food. And so that whole thing didn't really make sense. And there were a couple other like key things that they had to cut out of this cartoon, which I definitely miss. Because The Hobbit is a really like, well-paced, self-contained story. The only thing here, I thought I liked this part with the spiders, but I felt like it doesn't really do a lot narratively. And if they had, I would have much rather they cut out the part with the spiders and put in the Arkenstone of Thrain, than vice versa. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's ever gonna do another Hobbit cartoon. But
oh my God.
Yeah. I liked Peter Jackson's addition of how he wove in. I didn't like that he made it 3 movies, but I liked that he wove in the story of Radagast the Brown, and how he wove in the story of like, well, this is what Gandalf was actually up to, and he took that all out of the Silmarillion, right? All the stuff that Gandalf was up to when he was, or maybe he took it from bits of Lord of the Rings.
I think it's from Lord of the Rings. It's a passing thing he talks about. Yeah,
that's right. He's like, back when we had to chase the necromancer out of Mirkwood.
Yes.
And I thought that was really cool. I was like, wow, this is so cool that, like, when you're a kid, you're like, I don't know, Gandalf just keeps vanishing. Like, where is he going? He's like, I have business to attend to. And I was like, well, that makes sense. He's a big, important wizard. He can't just be hanging around with these dwarves all the time. He's got other stuff going on. But I thought it was really cool how Jackson added that. But then, yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I think maybe I've always thought in the past that one movie would have been better, but I think maybe you're right, because there's so many cool elements that maybe 2 90-minute movies would have been better than 3 3-hour movies.
Actually, I'll also say the smog, just visually, was amazing. In the Peter Jackson version.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, cool. Any Matt? Any other thoughts on any of these Tolkien cartoons?
No.
One thing. Sorry. In Return of the King, on the title page, the word production is misspelled. Just getting that out there.
Well, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to read this. At least it wasn't
the word proofreading.
Yeah.
I wanted to read this in terms of like length of movies. This is director Arthur Rankin. So this is the Return of the King cartoon. Asked why he chose only to make The Return of the King instead of making the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, Rankin admitted, "I didn't know that the audience would sit still for it. I was wrong."
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it also depends on the director, right? Because the Hobbit, like, that was pretty slow, right? The Peter Jackson version.
Oh, God.
Whereas the Lord of the Rings was incredibly engaging, and I think that just comes down to, direction.
Well, Peter Jackson is notorious. He just doesn't cut his scenes. He shoots them all. He writes them long. He shoots them long, and then doesn't edit. That's
well, Dave.
problem.
Did you watch the unedited version, or did you watch did you watch the extended versions of?
I just typed the titles into Amazon and rented them, and that's what came up. I assume it wasn't the extended.
I'm sorry. There's extended versions?
Oh no, I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I would imagine that there's probably some kind of uncut, 18-hour Hobbit.
God! Holy shit!
No, with extra walking.
You know what really bothers me about the Peter Jackson version and about these cartoons is they both cut two of my favorite scenes from the books, which I think are kind of story necessary. Maybe the second one more so than the first, but the first one is the part where Gandalf goes to Orthanc in Isengard, and after they destroy Isengard, and he talks to Saruman and is like, "You got to come down," and Saruman's like, "I'm not coming down," and they have this argument, and Saruman, because most of his magic is to do with his mouth, puts this politician style spell on everybody listening, and they all look at Gandalf and they see him as this unworthy, not worthy to tie Saruman's shoes. Oh, of course now, Gandalf's going to go up in the tower and they're going to talk and they'll tell us what's going to happen to us next. And then Gandalf, it doesn't work and he breaks the spell and breaks Saruman's staff. And then Saruman after that becomes this nobody. And I love that. It's one of my favorite scenes in the books, and it was gone from the Peter Jackson movies and it was not in these cartoons. And maybe that's not so story necessary, but the one that I think is even more important is the scouring of the Shire at the end of the three books, where, this is where now we see that Merry and Pippin and Frodo, having started out as these, no-name hobbits, these, just goofy little guys, are now, these impressive warriors, and they come back and set their town to rights. And I love that scene. Oh, even just talking about it right now gives me the chills, but it wasn't in Peter Jackson. Instead of that, we got 9 minutes. I think I timed it once. Maybe it's not 9 minutes, but it's an incredibly long scene of Merry and Pippin and Frodo jumping up and down in slow motion at Rivendell, which I was like, I remember when I first watched the movie, I was like, when's this going to end? Because he's using up time that he could spend on scouring of the Shire. And then it ended, and it was over, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I got to watch that slow motion jumping up and down and smile, that awkward, that super awkward,
Well, you didn't hear, Tom, there's going to be a 3-part trilogy of the Scouring of the Shire.
Now it makes sense. Now it all makes sense, yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm surprised it's only 3 parts, actually.
Yeah.
But no, and I was like, oh, well, it'll be in the cartoon. I'll get it in the cartoon, and nope. It wasn't in the cartoon either, which evidently everybody and his brother is like, no, this is just not a necessary part of the story. It really was.
I agree with you. I was really missed that. I thought I was calling it the Battle of the Shire, but is it Scouring Battle?
Yeah, that's
whatever. It's the same thing.
The title of the chapter, I think, is The Scouring of the Shire.
But yeah, I was missing that a lot. And one of my favorite scenes is when Aragorn brings the army of the dead. I was waiting for that, and it didn't happen. I was so fucking pissed. I was really pissed. Yeah.
Well, isn't Amazon doing a whole Lord of the Rings TV series that's $1 billion or something?
That's right. They are. So there we go.
The books, or is it a sequel, or what is it, the Silmarillion or something? Or
I thought it was supposed to be set.
It's Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
I thought I heard at one point it was set before Lord of the Rings, but I'm not even sure. I haven't read anything about it in a long time.
That would
but
be
it
the
starts
Silmarillion.
Frodo.
It does.
It has Frodo because they were I haven't heard anything about it except I saw a headline of an article that was Frodo, so-and-so cast as Frodo for Amazon's Lord of the Rings series.
Frodo, the high school years. Yeah.
It's the 50 years
Frodo
between when
junior
Bilbo
high.
left
Frodo
and
Homecoming.
Oh
right.
my God,
But
that's a
I mean,
bad idea.
I don't know when this start, like when in the chronology it starts, but presumably if it's popular, they would like keep going. So yeah, you might get your whole like season of the Scouring of the Shire or something. Who even knows?
Oh my God.
All right, but we got to move on to some of these other movies. So so I had forced you guys to watch, you might say, these 3 movies that Don Bluth was involved with.
Yeah.
And so the first thing was The Sword in the Stone, and he was just an assistant animator on this, but I thought it was relevant to fantasy and science fiction fans, so I thought we would watch it. And I remembered this being a little dull when I watched it as a kid, but watching it now, I actually, it's funny because, like adults would always be like, when I was a kid, they would be like, you got to watch this movie. And then I'd watch it and I'd be like, oh, this is kind of boring. But now I watched it and I'm like, this is so funny. There's like all these dad jokes in it. And now I just want to like force some kid to watch it. So, it's just like the circle of life or something. But
I forced both my sons to watch it. So maybe
that's child abuse.
Yeah.
Well,
so how did CPS on you?
How did that go, Tom? Did they like it?
They loved it. They sat completely still. I think though we were in the middle of a 2 weeks of no TV, so I think that probably.
Oh yeah.
It's like you haven't eaten.
You watch anything at that
gives
point.
You a hot dog, and you're like, "This is the best hot dog I've ever had."
It's not even meat.
So I don't know. So this is basically it's young King Arthur, and he meets Merlin, and Merlin transforms him into different animals to teach him lessons. And I thought it was pretty hilarious. I think the ending really, like, you're like, wait, that's the end.
Yeah.
It doesn't really build to anything that dramatic. But overall, I thought it was pretty enjoyable. But Andrea, it sounds like you hated it, or?
So my last note as I was watching it was, so fucking boring. Yeah, it was torturous for me. And when it's shouldn't be, I don't remember seeing it. I don't think I ever saw it, which is weird because I had like a pile of Disney albums when I was a kid, like every single Disney album, including Song of the South, which is about as racist as you can get.
Wait, you never, the part where he pulls the sword out of the stone, you never saw that before?
Nope. Never saw it.
Wow.
Never saw it. I think I've seen like like sales of it, but I've never seen the whole thing. I was so bored. It was just that, but here are my notes. The singing ... Jesus.
Yeah.
The deer Kay is about to shoot looks exactly like Bambi's mother. And then I was so bored, I started deconstructing it, going, okay, glasses would not, like eyeglasses not invented at this point. In what this world would be. No globes, a tea set, umbrellas, none of this is real. That's how bored I was when I was starting to deconstruct it. So this is the one I was very resentful of you.
It's Merlin though who has all that stuff, right? Does anyone else have glasses or?
I have no idea.
Because Merlin remembers the future, right? Or
he travels through time.
He lives backwards.
Yeah, he lives backwards.
That's never explained though. It's just it seems like he can go through time. Because he comes back from Bermuda or Bahamas.
Yeah, he does. He said not only does he come back from Bermuda, but he comes back from Bermuda in the 20th century.
Mid-century.
He has like sunglasses and like a bathing suit.
Yeah, Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah, which was very similar to Aladdin. It reminded me of the end of Aladdin, where the genie shows up with wearing like a goofy hat from Disney World and Bermuda shorts. And...
But Aladdin is good storytelling. This was not good storytelling. It was just like it was all about education. If you notice the notes and things said over and over again, this is your education. It's about an education. You should get an education. So it was like this it was this passion play for kids. You need to educate yourself, kids. So it wasn't like really a story. It was brainwashing, frankly.
Well, they goofed up big time at the end, because this was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. I absolutely adored this book, and I didn't read it till the covers fell off, but I read it a lot. And I loved, like, the ending was like this massive epiphany for me, where every one of these little scenes in the movie where we get to see him turn into a fish and a bird and a squirrel, and there's lots of other things I think in the book that I don't remember, but at the end, when he goes to pull the sword out of the stone, I was like, because I don't think I had seen this either, Andrea, or if I had, I didn't really remember it. But when I saw it, I was like, okay, here comes my favorite scene. And I was watching it with my kids, and I was like, this is the big one. This is when he goes to pull the sword out, and all he does is reach out and pull it out. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Because in the book is all about education as well, but this scene shows you why, because the movie doesn't have anything to do with education, apparently, and the book doesn't either until you get to the end. And then when he tries to pull the sword out in the book, he can't pull it out. And then there's a fish there's a little pond around the bottom of the anvil, and a fish pops up out of the pond and goes, "Put your back into it, lad. Remember when you were a fish and you had a strong backbone?" And then, the eagle or a hawk, like in the courtyard, says something else to him. And every animal that he's been comes in with a piece of advice for him about how to pull this sword out of the stone. And it all comes together, and he pulls it. And you're like, oh, the education, all this stuff he thought was just fun, he was learning. Whereas in the movie, it's just like he just reaches out and pulls it out. And I'm like, how is that movie then about education? It's not.
Yeah, well, that sounds so much better. Oh, my God.
We are talking about the Once and Future King, right?
I was talking about the Sword and the... I thought the book was called The Sword and the Stone. Am I just...
The T.H. White book?
Yeah, is that called the Once and Future King?
Once and Future King, yeah. I'm looking at it right now.
I think my copy of it was called The Sword and the Stone, but maybe I'm wrong. I think my copy of it, actually, they changed the title to The Sword and the Stone. I did not realize there was a book called Once and Future King. But I think the book that I read probably came out after the movie. Well, must have come out after the movie, right? Because the movie was made in the 60s.
Yeah.
But, which is amazing. Like, I loved the animation in this. I was like, it's great animation. I love the voice characterization. I actually really liked this movie. I think part of it was because I was mapping too much of the book that I love onto the movie without it having to show up in the movie. And part of it was the animation, and part of it was the characterization and the voices. But I really was bothered by the fact that it would have taken them an extra 10 seconds of dialogue, or maybe 30 seconds of dialogue, to make the story resonate, and they just didn't do that end scene properly.
I want to get Matt in here. Matt, what'd you think of Sword in the Stone?
I think my take is closest to Andrea's. I feel like this is the first act of a 3-act story. It was just like, here's your training. Mm-hmm. And then now you go off and do something. And then when he goes off and pulls the sword out, that's it. And like, there was one of the things I wrote down was there was no real sacrifice for pulling the sword out. And I think that, Thomas, as you said, like if we had learned that, if we had been reminded that all the things that he learned along the way helped him do that, it would have brought it all together. Yeah. But to me, it just seemed like Disney was having a lot of fun with their animation, but they really didn't think about the story too much.
Yeah.
It was not interesting at all to me, these little like, okay, now you're going to be a fish. Now you're going to be a bird. Now you're going to be a squirrel. Oh, now you have to learn how to court a squirrel. Oh, and then break her heart.
That was legitimately heartbreaking when that little squirrel's up on the branch. Like, that was really sad.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. And it just goes to show that they didn't think about characterization too much in this. If your most interesting character is a squirrel that never talks.
It was funny though, because let me say, because I watched this with my girlfriend Stephanie, and at the end she's like, yeah, the ending, I feel like it would have been better if it had gone at least somewhat into like his actual like life as King Arthur, if you would like see him as an adult somehow.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm like, but that makes you think like kind of weird thoughts. I just imagine Merlin being like, so Wart, here's what's going to happen to you. Your best friend's going to have sex with your wife. You're going to have sex with your half-sister. And then your bastard son is going to come back and kill you. And he's like, gosh, Archimedes, what's sex? It's like...
Talk to Merlin about that.
Yeah. And I think when the movie came out, the Arthurian legends had already been done to death. And I think it was more like, oh, we're going to show you like the part that you've never seen, the part when he was a kid, which I think was, even with me, the Arthurian legends, there were all kinds of movies about it when I was a kid that were just on all the time. So you'd seen him to death. And to me, it was really cool. Not because I don't think I saw the movie, but it was really cool to find this book that's like, oh, it's King Arthur when he's just a little kid like me. This is so cool.
Yeah, well, let me say, the other thing I liked about this is that I genuinely liked Wart as a character, because he's a good-hearted kid. and we'll get to this in a second, but so many of these main characters in these cartoons are just awful, insufferable brats. That just to have a main character that I liked was, it got a lot of points for me just for that simple thing. But Matt, was there anything else you wanted to say there?
No. Not that I could think of.
All right, cool. So let's move on to our reason for this whole panel. The Secret of NIMH, 1982. So Andrea, you were the one, I think, who really wanted to talk about Secret of NIMH, right? You want to talk about what is kind of your history with Secret of NIMH?
I don't remember. Was I? Okay. But yes, I do love the movie.
I've got it on tape.
Oh boy. Well, there you go. I must have been drunk. Yes, I did love the movie. I remember very vividly watching it. And the movie is what led me to the book, not the other way around. I remember it. It was exactly the way I remembered it, which was it's great to watch. It's got some great animation. It's got great voice characterization, but it's very one-dimensional in the story department. And a lot of stuff doesn't make any damn sense until you read the book, and then you're like, oh, okay, because they shoehorned all this magic into it for I don't know why, and none of like where's the stone, the necklace, like what the hell is that thing? It's never explained. Nicodemus, you never get to know him as a character, so when he dies, it's meaningless. And the book is so rich in story, and it's basically the book is a science fiction book. This was like a fantasy movie. But it's still like, even all of that, even knowing going into it, it was going to make no sense. It's still a beautiful film that I remember fondly. And also Shannon Doherty is Teresa, and Will Wheaton is the voice of the son. So just get that out there.
Yeah, I remembered loving this, and I remembered primarily loving the book, although I remembered liking the movie as well. And I was pretty let down, to be honest, watching this.
On the second watch?
Well, just watching it for this panel. Mm-hmm. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I think the premise is great. So the premise basically is that there are these rats, and they were the subject of lab experiments that boosted their intelligence, and then they escaped, and then they've built this whole like electrified underground burrow or whatever, but then the people who boosted their intelligence are still looking for them, and they're kind of on the run. I think that's such a great premise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess I'll get some other people in here, but I have more to say about it. But Tom, what are your sort of overall impressions of The Secret of NIMH?
I had never seen it before, and I don't know how I missed it and the book my whole life until now. And I still have not read the book, but I'm definitely going to get the book and read it to my kids. I didn't realize that they just left a lot of stuff. Well, it makes sense, but I didn't realize that they just kind of whole cloth left a lot of the most important elements out of the movie. But I having never seen it before, I thought the movie was enjoyable. I thought it was a really cool premise that so many times you got these Disney movies where they have these characters who are animals and they're just talking, and you're like, yeah, of course, there's talking animals in a Disney thing. But in this, it was like, no, there's a reason they're talking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but that's super confusing in the movie, because it seems like all the animals wear clothes and talk, regardless of whether they've had their intelligence boosted or not.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it also so I'm watching this with my girlfriend who I don't think she'd seen it before. And she was super confused. And I was like, oh, well, no, these rats escaped from this lab and they had their intelligence boosted and stuff. And you would never know that. Like, that doesn't get explained until almost the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's the point of having a cool premise if, you watch most of the movie without knowing what it is? And then I feel like 100% this movie should have started off with the rats escaping from the lab. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we jump ahead. Because, without that, it doesn't make any sense at all. Mm-hmm. But I'm still confused. Even knowing that, I'm still confused about how, the anti-hedgehog, or whatever she was, anti-hedgehog, Shrew. Why she had clothes and everything. I'm totally baffled about that. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I found this this movie very affecting, actually, and it's probably has a lot to do with nostalgia. I don't think I've seen this since I was really young, and just going back there, and even just like Dom DeLuise' antics as the clumsy crow, like just that voice and his facial expressions, like I was like, wow, I really have not seen this in, probably since it came out. But yeah, I had the same kind of logic questions. I'm like, wait a minute. So the rats are super smart, but the mice have like clothing and furniture and other. I'm like, so the mice aren't stupid. So what makes the rats extra smart? And we never really see that. So I mean, I guess they use electricity, but besides that, it didn't seem like they were that much smarter. But there was something really charming about the setting of just all of this happening on just one farm.
Yeah.
Especially like, you see how big, the world is to the mice, and then, you zoom out and it's just like one, basically like a few acres of a farm. And, there's like a great line when they go underground, they're like, oh, we're actually almost 3 feet underground right now. It's like, oh my God, 3 feet. I thought like stuff like that. And then the, the animation style and the, what was the name of the owl, the great owl?
Yeah.
Like that stuff was just like I love that sort of mystical, creepy element that we don't understand. I agree that, magic, doodad, whatever she had, that was just completely unexplained.
Yeah.
And it was just like, here's the, here's the little Deus Ex Machina that gets us out of trouble. I was like, okay, I guess, you got to save the child with love, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. But there was just something about the kind of innocence of the mice that really affected me. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I also found this to be fairly violent for kids. There's
blood, isn't there?
There's blood and there's murder.
And the kids almost die.
And the kids almost die. And then there's like, oh, we have to drug the cat.
The cat, yeah.
And I'm just like, this is, kind of adult heavy themes, but which I like because I feel like you're trusting.
Yeah. Well, how many kids went and got addicted to drugs after watching this movie? Right?
No, I don't mean it that way. I just mean like, I think a lot of our, especially our like early fairy tales all had very serious themes, right? So like, Little Red Riding Hood was a warning against rape, right? So, I feel like they weren't afraid to approach these very adult themes of like, murder and violence and there is an evil drug company experimenting on rats and trying to kill them. Those are pretty heavy themes, and then but it's a children's movie. So like I respect the directors for not toning it down. And for, letting children are exposed to lots of violence already. I mean, I didn't think it was by today's standards anything, but I mean, I feel like at the time, 1982, that was probably pretty violent for kids.
Yeah, but so I agree with everything you just said. I think just the issue is basically what Andrea said, is that this is a science fiction story, and it should have stayed a science fiction story.
Yeah.
See, Tom, did you show this one to your kids?
No. No, I agree that it's probably a bit much, but I mean, I read up on it a little bit, and the animators, the creators, Don Bluth included, kind of wanted to do an anti-Disney movie. Mm-hmm. Apparently, like they were Disney creators, but they wanted to do something completely against the grain, and so they made this. And no, I don't think they'd enjoy it, or they might enjoy it, but I wouldn't want them to enjoy it. But I do agree that there is something kind of lacking. I agree with you, Matt, that there is something kind of lacking from our fairy tales these days. Like you said, Little Red Riding Hood, and then the Three Little Pigs. The Three Little Pigs version I read to my kids. The Three Little Pigs version I grew up with was the one pig is really industrious, and so he creates a brick house, and another one is less industrious and makes one out of sticks, and the last one is lazy and makes it out of straw. And then the last two pigs get eaten up, and then the brick pig is like, he's fine, and he's like, well, too bad for my brothers. And that was basically hey, don't be lazy. And the one that I read to my kids now is like, well, the hay house gets blown down, and so does the stick house, and they all go and hang out in the brick house, and then they're all fine. And I was like, so this is a story of what, nepotism, I guess? Is it like networking? Like, no, just like make sure you have
rich friends.
Yeah.
and you'll be absolutely fine. So yeah, I guess no, I wouldn't show it to my kids.
Let me just explain so you mentioned a little bit of the history. So Don Bluth had been an animator at Disney and sort of got discouraged because he felt like they were, cutting corners and didn't care anymore and stuff. And so he left and started his own company and took a bunch of other Disney animators with him. And this, I think, The Secret of NIMH was the first feature that they did. And it was, I think it got a good critical reception, but they all went bankrupt. And then he went bankrupt like 4 more times.
Oh, God.
You get the idea that making
and then he became president.
He kept reforming his company, right? He would go bankrupt, and then instead of like renaming it, it was like the Don Bluth Film Company, the Don Bluth Production Company, the Bluth Brothers. Like, it was just like he just kept like adding another adjective or something.
But yeah, so he made a lot of movies, the other one I wanted to talk about was Titan AE, which is the last one he did.
Can I just point out one last thing about Secret of NIMH? Sure. My cat, who has never found much interest in the television, jumped up and started pawing at the screen for Secret of NIMH. I just want to say that. Never did that before, ever. Actually,
my cat Oryx was definitely watching this when the mice were kind of like scurrying across the logs and stuff like
so
that.
Weird.
She was just transfixed, But yeah, so Titan AE was Don Bluth's last movie that he made, which also resulted in bankruptcy. But it's it's a very like Star Wars kind of thing. Yeah. So I thought it would be good to talk about on this. And I'd never seen it. I was just kind of curious to watch it.
Yeah.
So how about Matt? What'd you think of Titan AE?
Well, so for the first like 10 minutes or so, I'm like, oh, this could actually work. It's got an interesting setup, and I love the idea that he's a human among aliens, and humans are kind of like the laughing stock of the galaxy because there's only a few left, and he could just be the savior of the human race. But it's like it pretty much jumped the shark for me like 17 times. I'm not sure if it was like the constant emo music that they had to throw in there. I love the animation style of it. I thought that there were parts of it that were just really cool. But it kept doing really stupid things with the plot that bothered me to the point where I got frustrated. And I didn't like, Dave, you were talking about heroes that are really annoying.
Yes.
I found this guy to be just insufferable.
Absolutely, yes.
Like he was just whiny and complaining and, arrogant and just self-righteous, self-centered. And it's not anybody that I want to follow for like 2 hours or whatever it was. And I think, a lot of this comes from, Star Wars, right? So The Last Hope, the episode 4 or whatever, where like Luke at the beginning he's kind of whiny, like right. But then he like matures and grows up pretty quick, and I feel like a lot of people who don't quite get story think like, oh, we got to make him really whiny like Luke. It's like, but that doesn't work long term. I mean, it like there needs to be a character arc there, and so like some of the special effects I thought were astounding. Like I really liked the when they're going through that like ice asteroid field. that was cool, and I like the actual Titan spaceship. Like, it's basically like this Svalbard seed vault of humanity, and like that was a cool concept. So it had some cool ideas, but there were just some ridiculous parts of it, like where he basically discovers he could, like, this super advanced alien species, the Dredge, right? They're pure energy. For some reason, they just want to destroy humanity because plot. And then he gets captured by them. They decide to, like, don't they let his girlfriend, like, what's her name, go for no reason?
They jettison her.
Pod.
They jettison her, right? You know, meanwhile they want to kill humanity, but let's jettison her.
Yeah.
And then he, like, escapes from his prison by basically putting his two fingers together and then, like, walking out of the jail. And I'm like, these are super advanced alien species, but all he needs is just put his two fingers together and that'll get him out. Like, at that point I was like, oh god. Like,
yeah, they didn't think of that. They were like, oh well, we're gonna have to rethink our security measures, I guess.
Like, I watched Secret of NIMH, I think, right after this, and you know, where the mouse, Mrs. Withers, where she
Brisby?
Miss Brisby, where she escapes her cage, but it's like she's got to really struggle, and it's like a full scene where she's like, you know, trying to break her back to get out, and I was like, okay, I'll accept that because it's like, it was really difficult, but like Titan AE's like, let me just put my two fingers and open this door. I don't know.
Well, let me just explain about the animation style for people who haven't seen it. So it combines hand-drawn characters with a lot of computer-generated sets, basically. And the computer-generated sets are like 90s computer animation, so they don't like look that good by today's standards, and to my mind don't match with the characters a lot of times. But they enable the camera to move around in really interesting ways. And so, like, some of the shots, I agree with you, Matt, are really, really cool to watch. I also really liked the part where they're on the ocean with the, like, hydrogen plants.
Yeah.
And they're zooming all around. I thought that was super cool. But yeah, definitely the highlight was the reflective ice asteroids, where it's sort of like a hall of mirrors, kind of cat and mouse hunt. But yeah, so Tom, what'd you think of Titan AE?
I am embarrassed to say I kind of liked it. Like, I had seen it. I saw it when it came out on DVD, or maybe it was even VHS. I think it was DVD though. It was like in 2004 or 2003. I can't remember, but not when it came out, but when it came out on DVD. I watched it, and I remember being like, oh, this is fun. You know, it's a fun story, and then I watched, and I specifically remembered when I went back and I watched Treasure Planet recently with my kids, and I was waiting for the end line of Titan AE, because I thought the whole, like, we're not calling it Bob, which I really liked. Like, and just for the listeners who haven't seen it, at the end of the movie, and I'll try not to spoil it, but they're like, see this planet, and they're like, what are we gonna name it? And he's like, well, Matt Damon says, I was thinking about calling it Bob. It's Matt Damon, right? And Drew Barrymore?
Yeah.
So Matt Damon, which I thought their chemistry was kind of fun. And I agree he was whiny, and I didn't like that part of it, and the story wasn't great. You're right, the security thing, like, well, we don't have duct work, but look what we do have. But he's like, I was thinking of calling it Bob, and she's like, we're not calling it Bob. And they kiss while they're kind of like making fun of each other. I thought that was really clever. It just not clever, but it just stuck with me. I was like, that feels real to me. And I liked the characters in it. I thought the visuals were good.
Actually, let me jump in there, because you were about to talk about Treasure Planet, which is like a bizarrely almost identical movie to this. I think it's much better. But it's like, it came out, I think, like 2 years later or something. It was Disney, but it's like really unsettling how similar the two movies are. But if you like Titan AE at all, you should watch Treasure Planet, because it's basically a better done version of almost exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I did watch it, and I wonder if Disney was like, oh, that movie could have been really good if we had just done a couple things different. But it was also like the biggest, like one of the biggest financial disasters for Disney as well.
Wait,
so
Treasure Planet, or yes?
Treasure
I've
Planet.
never even heard of it. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's Treasure Island, but they just do it as sci-fi in space.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since, I think, college, but I I really liked it when I saw it.
But I like the characters in this. I thought there were some really clever, inventive ideas, like the the kangaroo alien and the other. What was the other alien? I can't remember off the top of my head. What
The googly-eyed one?
Yeah, was he like a praying mantis or something like that? But anyway, I thought the characters were kind of fun, and I didn't really worry too much about the story being kind of ridiculous because I had some fun with it, and I liked the voice actors in it. So. Other than that, no, it's not a great movie or anything, but I thought it was a whole lot of fun.
It has an amazing cast. I didn't know who was in it until I was watching the credits, and it's like, wait, I think I wrote it down, but it's like, yeah, like even like the stupid cockroach cook who has 2 lines is Jim Brewer.
Jim Brewer.
Like, but the script I just think is absolutely flat out terrible in this movie,
which is actually quite funny because the 2 screenwriters are John August and Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
Who are two of the most well-known, successful screenwriters at the moment, and have been for like 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah.
Well, this is from Wikipedia. It said the script had been passed around to various writers such as Ben Edlund, Joss Whedon, and Art Vitello. After $30 million had been spent in the film's early development with no progress, Art Vitello was sacked. And so basically, so there was this script that had been, in development for years. And basically, Don Bluth Productions, they had made Anastasia, which did really well, but then they didn't have another project lined up. And so they're like, we can basically like shut down the studio and fire everyone, or we can make Titan AE, because this is the only script that we have to work with. And they didn't like it at all.
The script definitely has like a written by committee feel. Because like, all right, I don't know if you guys have seen these articles lately where like AI is writing short stories. They're like, some people are like, oh, the stories are really good. I'm like, well, yeah, like they're good if you just like the plot by numbers, like, oh, well, we got to have a space battle and we got to have a betrayal and we got to have, we got to have the MacGuffin and this film has all of that, right?
Sure,
so it's like right at the moment, like you're like, the guy that he trusted all along who brought him on board. Oh, I'm going to betray you. I'm secretly working for the aliens. Well, of course you are, because plot by numbers, right?
But didn't you figure that out like 5 seconds into meeting that character? Like I was just like, this is the guy who's going to betray him. I was like, it was so obvious.
But it didn't make any sense though, like at all. It didn't make any sense.
No. But there was a lot of things that didn't make any sense in this movie.
But yeah, like the whole story seems to have been constructed like, but out of scenes from other movies, out of scenes that have appeared in at least 5 other science fiction movies. It's like, if the scene hasn't appeared in at least 5 other movies, it's not making it into this one,
Yeah.
Well, it's basically Genesis at the end, right?
Yes, so, it is. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I was terrified that it was going to be like, and his name was Adam, and her name was Eve.
Right.
God. Yeah.
Oh wait, here's the list. Here's the cast: Matt Damon, Bill Pullman, Drew Barrymore, Nathan Lane, Jim Brewer, Janine Garofalo, and John Leguizamo.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how they got roped into being in this stupid movie.
That's just a rundown of all the famous actors in the 90s. Like, this thing was so 90s, even right down to the haircuts. Like, the main character had that shaggy 90s haircut that all the teen beat love interests have. Yeah, I mean, I just want to weigh in. I had never seen this before. I knew the movie existed, never seen it. And I was kind of like into it at first. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Kind of Independence Day-ish, although that's a terrible movie. But I was into it, and especially with the music, I thought it was interesting. And then it was just like, the problem with a couple of the other movies is that there's no layer. It's one-dimensional storytelling. There's no layers. There's no complications, really. The dad's dead. There's no, we're not discovering anything. And that, that's what the Titan is. Makes a planet. Well, what? Everything about it was just like,
it didn't make any sense because they use it at the end to beat the dredge.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, why didn't they just do that and save Earth at the beginning?
Yeah.
They could have used, they had this super powerful ship that they escaped from Earth with just before Earth was destroyed, and then they have to go find it so they can defeat the dredge, and then they do, and it's like,
not only do they have to find it, but he puts the only way to find it on his son and doesn't tell him.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of things of like bad parenting going on in this movie, is that he doesn't tell the kid till the last minute that he's leaving him. I was like, wow, that's shitty parenting, right there.
But I'm like so sick of the like, oh, I hate my dad.
Yes.
I'm so pissed at my dad because he just like left because he was trying to save the entire human race from extinction by aliens. It's like there's such a mismatch between like what's actually happening in the story and like the character, how like self-centered and whiny the character is about
like, wouldn't
it.
you consider your dad a hero?
Yeah, that really bothered me about this movie, and you're right. That is a trope that really always bothers me whenever it pops up a lot, too. You're right. Where it's like, oh, my dad. Actually, wasn't it in, I just for the first time listened to, that big famous movie, A Wrinkle in Time. Not the movie, but I listened to the book on audio when
Madeline Langle.
Yeah, and I thought I had read it, but I had read some knockoff that I really liked when I was a kid, but I had never read it. And isn't that in there? Like, they're like, the main character is all upset because her father disappeared to go save, like, humanity. She's, like, all angry at him.
I don't know
sounds
that
right. I haven't read it in a long time.
But I haven't either, but it's a little more, it's got a little bit more layers to that story.
It does, it does. And I didn't mean to start a whole tangent, but yeah, you're right. There's more to it. But that aspect of it bothered me when I heard it. I was like, no, you can't be upset. Your father went to try to help everybody, and you lost him, but it's sad, but you can't be angry at him.
Yeah.
It would have been more interesting if he like put on a show of being tough and being like, no, my dad's a hero, but like deep down he was still stewing about the fact that he left because he was a kid and he needed his father, and like that would have been a more complex character, but this movie just went right for the surface level detail, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the same, there's no depth to the characters, there's no depth to the storytelling. It was just like it's all text, there's no subtext, you know what I'm saying?
I also just want to point out that the main character in this is named Kail.
Yes!
And we also had a General Kail in Willow that we watched.
Yes.
And there's not been a single character named Kurtley, Gerencer, or Kressel.
Well,
so does that really seem fair to you, Andrea?
You know what? I'm just gonna take the fifth on this one.
Wait a minute. There is the Kessel run.
There you go.
That's stretching it.
Yeah, the missing letter.
I found it a little disturbing to hear my name constantly. Just a little. But you know what? There's another thing I wanted to point out with this. We were talking about Casey Kasem and the very distinctive voice that makes it impossible to divorce the actor from the character, like, because you just picture the actor. This is the same thing with Drew Barrymore. She has such a distinctive voice that every time the character talked, I was like, it's just Drew Barrymore. I can't look at the character because it doesn't look like Drew Barrymore. So I think she was and this is not a knock on Drew Barrymore, but I just think it's hard to cast her as a voice actor in animation because her voice is so distinctive that I cannot lose myself in a character when she's voicing it. But anyway,
same with Matt Damon for me. Every time, like,
really?
You said you didn't know who was in it until you got to the end. The minute I heard his voice, I was like, Matt Damon.
Andrea said this is so 90s, but it also has some 80s with the A-Team montage toward the end. Where they're going to repair, they're going to repair the spaceship and they're all like getting together and it's like, dun, 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 dun. You can almost hear like, dun, 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 dun. So
it was kind of like the A-Team. They have to, it's almost like they had to drug the kangaroo to get her on the ship.
Yeah.
You ain't getting me on an airplane.
So I have some stuff about what Don Bluth is up to now because I guess I'll just read this. On October 26th, 2015, Bluth and Goldman, who was one of his partners at Don Bluth Animation, started a Kickstarter campaign in hopes of resurrecting hand-drawn animation by creating an animated feature-length film of Dragon's Lair. So that's sort of, I guess that's kind of going. Yeah, so he also did, I don't know if you guys remember the Dragon's Lair arcade game.
No, I don't.
And Space Ace.
Yeah. So it's this. You would know it if you saw it. It's this knight in kind of chainmail with a sort of, I don't know, golden colored tunic or something, and a sort of steel cap, and you have to like push the joystick one way or another, basically to say which way he goes, and you die if you do the wrong thing.
It was a literal cartoon. And then apparently it was controlled by a laser disc, which was high tech in the 80s. And you would basically use the joystick, and then if you went left, it would play one shot, and you went right, you played another, and there was only one right answer. So if you went the wrong way, you died. So it pretty much ate your quarters, at least when I played.
But it was super fun. I absolutely loved it. Dirk the Daring.
Yeah, there was a Saturday morning cartoon version too that I saw a couple episodes of. So it would be like, here's the situation. Do you think that Dirk should do this, this, or this? And then it would be like, if he had done this, this is what happens, and he dies. And so like, if he had done this, this is what happens, and he dies. And it's like, so that's why he did this, and he survives. And I thought it was in the days before,
So really, choose your own adventure, which was huge in the 80s.
It's like, yeah. It's a choose your own adventure.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, we're running kind of short on time.
Well, did anybody notice in that movie that there was a trade ship that was called Soros? I don't know. I'm not saying there's anything conspiracy theories, but just pointing that out.
I did not notice that.
Yes,
and it was a liberal ship.
There were liberals.
All right.
Did you notice the planet was called Trump? Did anybody notice that?
Right.
God.
All right. So have we covered all these movies pretty well? Anyone have anything occur to anyone about any of these movies that they wanted to mention?
I noticed, since you asked about my showing NIMH to my kids, and since I showed many of these movies or some of these movies to my kids, I've noticed that at the beginning of every animated fantasy movie, it'll say something like, warning, or rated such and such for violence, strong language, and fantasy.
What?
Because somehow they group fantasy in with strong language and violence. Like, well, the strong language and violence I don't mind, but if it's got fantasy, my kid's not watching it. It's almost like they should add in, like, it's like those labels that say, this food was processed in a facility that also processes peanuts, tree nuts, poison ivy, and yellow cake uranium. It's like they need to add like strong language, violence, scenes of bestiality, and by the way, there's magic in this.
Beware that make believe, that corrupting influence of imagination.
That will ruin your kids.
Yeah.
Actually, this is kind of a funny note here. So the book that The Secret of NIMH is based on is called Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH. And so they changed the name from Frisbee to Brisbee because they didn't want to get sued by the Frisbee Corporation of America.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw that too. That's crazy.
I'm getting up to look at it because these are all the books I have. I'm in my bedroom and I have bookshelves in here, and all the books that are in my bedroom are all the books that I loved as a child. Like, all my favorite books are in these bookcases. So I'm looking at it, and yes, you are absolutely right. It is Mrs. Frisbee. Huh.
Mm.
Interesting. You just pointed out something I never noticed.
Yeah, that's why you listen to this podcast.
That is why I listen to it. I don't actually listen to it. I mean, let's be honest.
I guess that's a fair point. Yeah.
It's like The Sword and the Stone. It's completely educational.
Exactly.
All right, cool. So why don't we wrap this up? So how about everyone, let's just go around and have everyone say, how strongly do you recommend? Like, which, if any of these movies would you recommend that people watch? So, Tom, which, if any of these movies would you recommend people watch?
I don't know that I recommend that anybody watch any of them. I think if you haven't already watched The Hobbit as a kid, I don't know that you're going to get a lot out of it, but it's worth going and looking at. If you're a diehard Tolkien fan, I would go for that one.
All right. Matt.
I think The Secret of NIMH is definitely worth a watch if you like animated films. I still love The Hobbit. I mean, it's not a perfect film, but it just perfectly captures, that time of childhood when I watched it, and I love to revisit it. And I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings movie better than others. The animated one better than the others did. But yeah, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, it's interesting to watch, but none of these are required viewing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrea?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Matt, except for the Lord of the Rings movie. Don't go near that, unless you have a problem sleeping.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, The Secret of NIMH, which is I loved. And it has the flaws that I talked about, but it's still a beautifully animated film, and beautifully voice acted. And The Hobbit is just, that is just a staple of my childhood. And it is such a better interpretation and adaptation of The Hobbit than the 55 hours the version that Peter Jackson made. That I think it's worth a look at.
Right.
Those are my two picks.
Yeah. I think everyone should watch The Hobbit. And like I said, I liked The Sword and the Stone. A little bit dull, but it made me laugh. So, I'm gonna put in a good word for that. And Titan AE, I would definitely not recommend, but unless you're like, if you're interested in animation or something, because there's a lot visually that it does that I wish other movies had kind of taken and run with. It was sort of onto something visually, and unfortunately the script is just not good at all. But with a better script, I think that visual style could really be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So why don't we wrap things up there? So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Tom Gerencer, and Matthew Kressel. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Tom Gerencer, and Matthew Kressel for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.